Hey babes, and welcome to Gore&Gossip. I'm Nicole.
And I'm Jordan, and this is your weekly deep dive into all things terrifying. True crime cases, cold-blooded killers, and the occasional creepy conspiracy.
Plus haunted dolls, cursed mirrors, and that one time your aunt swore her house was built on a portal to the underworld.
If it's bloody, bizarre, or just plain bone-chilling, we're talking about it.
And yes, we're bringing the gossip too, because what's a murder without a little side-eye?
So lock the doors, light a candle,
and let's get into it. Hi guys.
Hey guys.
How's everyone doing? How's everyone's mental space after last episode?
Last episode was literally so crazy, you pieced it together so well. And also, I don't know if you watched the YouTube comments, but you got complimented on that.
Oh, thank you. I did not check that. I did not. I honestly am so lacking with our YouTube sometimes, so I apologize for anybody that watches over there, but I will definitely check it out.
It's popping off. She's popping off over there, so
yeah.
Just thought you should know that.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Well, there's a lot happening. Jordan officially finished ACOTAR. She's into Crescent City.
I don't like Crescent City, but I'll get through
it. She doesn't like it right now, right? Just let's say it. She doesn't like it right now. It will change, I can promise. I think it will get better for you. It's a lot of world building at first, and it's really a lot. You're just thrown into this universe that's crazy, especially because it's modern. So I feel like a lot of times when they're modern, you think that it's going to you either think it's going to be easier or harder. And I feel like a lot of times the modern fantasy worlds tend to be a little bit harder because now we're adding in crazy technology and all this kinds of stuff. So yeah, it's a lot, but literally just pretend it's just gibberish, and it'll at some point compute to you. I don't know how else to explain it. It'll compute, I promise.
I'll keep tracking just because I love Nicole, and I'm also really excited for ACOTAR 6, which we now have titles and also the book cover of. So I'm so
synopsis
happy.
of, and I'm unwell.
I
am unwell.
I know. I need it to be October already.
I can't even talk about half of what I want to talk about because she hasn't read Crescent City.
I will finish it before October. I promise.
Yes. You better, I swear.
I will.
We'll get there.
Yes, I know. And then we also wanted to briefly just talk about also another true crime case that is happening currently and unfolding.
Yes. Yeah.
The Lindsay Clancy case. So
yeah.
I'll let Nicole
we just want to touch on it because it's very on the forefront of all of our minds right now. The trial is happening, and this is not to talk about the outcome, whether we think Lindsay did it or not, because that's not even what the trial is about. This is literally just a little, PSA that if you are somebody who has been dealing with postpartum depression, postpartum psychosis, if you have dealt with it, if you are not alone. And honestly, not even just postpartum, if you are dealing with depression, any kind of psychosis, whatever, you're not alone. There are people out there that care, whether it's strangers or family. And if you are somebody who knows somebody who could be freshly going through postpartum depression, or it's just going through postpartum regardless is so hard. It is so hard. Check in on them, make them talk to you, get them out of the house, be there for them, because it really does take a village, and it does not matter what kind of village you might have. As somebody who's gone through postpartum, it is lonely, dude. It can feel so lonely, even with the most support that you could have. Sometimes you just feel so alone because it's a lot to take on as being a new mother. So if you are somebody that's out there, there are resources. We'll add some resources in our show notes and our posts too. We'll definitely pull some stuff up for you guys. And please just reach out. my stories are not perfect for with fertility, motherhood. Obviously, nobody's perfect. No timeline is perfect. So we're here. We just wanted to quickly put that out there for you guys. Please don't feel alone. You are here and we hear you, and thank God that you are here.
Yes. Everything that Nicole said.
Yeah. All right. I just want to put that out there because I know it's a lot going on. There's a lot of talk right now. So we just want to put that out there real quick. But we're going to jump right into it because part 2 is probably going to be just as long as part 1. So I don't want to hold us up too much. You guys know we love to yap. So let's yap about what we got to yap about. But first, I know because we took a week break, we are going to jump back in and take a look at where we had left off. So when we began the story, we weren't just looking at a double homicide. We were looking at the rise and eventual collapse of one of the most powerful legal families in South Carolina. For nearly 87 years, 3 generations of the... Okay, hold on, please. Pronunciation again, because I already know I'm going to say it wrong.
Murdaugh.
Okay. That's what I had in my head, so maybe I do have it right now, because you guys know I kept saying it wrong.
You got it. It's Murdaugh.
Okay, so the Murdaugh family served as solicitors for South Carolina's 14th Judicial Circuit. Remember, that is correct for their judicial circuit. That was why I put it in there, and I kept telling myself it was wrong because I kept thinking that I just kept using it from the previous case, which was not the case at all. I was correct. Their law firm was well known throughout the Low Country, and the Murdaugh name carried influence that stretched far beyond the courtroom. Alex Murdaugh seemed to have the life many people would envy. He was successful. He was a successful attorney, married to his college sweetheart Maggie, and together they had 2 sons, Buster and Paul. From the outside, the family appeared successful, respected, and deeply rooted in their community. But behind that image, another story had been unfolding. In 2019, we saw the fatal accident that killed 19-year-old Mallory Beach, who was supposedly a friend of Paul Murdaugh's. Murdaugh, Alex's son. The criminal charges against Paul, along with the wrongful death suit filed by Mallory's family, brought an unprecedented level of scrutiny to their family. And that lawsuit eventually became an important factor and another reason for everything that led. It brought up a lot of information, as we saw. And the attorneys began seeking information about Alex's finances related to the civil suit for the wrongful death because they were using Alex's boat. And it would take investigators some time to discover that Alex had been stealing from his own clients for years, like we saw in the last episode. He diverted settlement money, created fake financial accounts. He lied to his clients. He not only lied to his clients, but he was lying to coworkers, the rest of his family even, who were also involved in the law firm, because remember, they were part owners of the law firm. He stole millions of dollars from people who had trusted him during some of their worst moments. One of the most heartbreaking examples that we saw involved Gloria Satterfield, their longtime housekeeper. Remember, he had convinced her sons, after she had died of an accident on their property, to file an insurance claim, and the insurance company was to pay out $4 million, and her sons never received that money. They didn't even know that was being set out there. They thought that it was still, getting worked out in the courts, and they didn't know that it had actually settled. By the summer of 2021, Alex's carefully constructed financial world was beginning to fall apart. The Beach lawsuit was continuing, his law partners were starting to close in on him about missing money, and his financial schemes were becoming harder to hide. On June 7th, 2021 is when we see Paul and Maggie were found shot to death near the dog kennels at the family's Moselle hunting property. Remember, that's the one big hunting property that they had acres and acres and acres of land on. When we were saying that one that had it was reminded us of the Royals, of how big it was. But in September of that year, everything had changed. After reporting that he had been shot on the side of a rural road, investigators quickly began questioning Alex's version of events. The roadside shooting was no random attack. Instead, investigators alleged it had been orchestrated by Alex himself. Almost overnight, public attention started to shift. And the man many people had viewed as another victim was suddenly at the center of multiple criminal investigations. His law firm forced him to resign, financial crimes continued to surface, former clients came forward, and investigators started looking at every part of Alex's life through a very different lens. But despite everything that they had uncovered, the biggest question still remained. Who killed Maggie and Paul Murdaugh? And that's where we're going to pick back up. By the morning of June 7th, 2021, Alex Murdaugh had spent years balancing a life that was becoming increasingly difficult to hold together. To the outside world, he was an established attorney, husband, father, and he was a member of the most recognizable legal family, or one of them, in South Carolina. Behind the scenes, however, multiple problems were beginning to collide. Like I had said, the Beach civil lawsuit was continuing, questions about his finances. His father, Randolph III, was gravely ill, and inside his own law firm, people had started asking questions that he honestly couldn't answer. What happened that Monday would become one of the most heavily analyzed days in modern true crime. Not because anyone knew what was happening at the time, but because investigators would eventually reconstruct nearly every hour using phones, vehicle data, surveillance, witness testimony, and digital records. So we're going to go through that day. Alex began the morning at, remember, Pimped, PMPED, that's the law firm, the Hampton law firm where he had worked for decades. At some point that morning, the firm's chief financial officer, Gene Seckinger, confronted him about missing legal fees from a case involving fellow attorney Chris Wilson. Now remember, Chris Wilson was his partner in crime. He was doing this with him. This wasn't just a casual conversation, though. The firm believed money that should have been paid to Pimp had instead gone directly to Alex. The amount was substantial, nearly $800,000.
Yo.
So that's what? Not just like little itty bitty dollars that was missing. $800,000. He wasn't just stealing like a 5 or 20 from the register, which is still horrible. But he was stealing $800,000. Insane. He had stolen millions, but still. According to testimony later presented at trial, Seckinger asked Alex where the money was. Alex reportedly told her the funds had been structured differently and that everything would be taken care of. It wasn't. The conversation ended without a satisfactory explanation. Looking back, prosecutors argued this confrontation marked one of the most significant moments of that day. For the first time, people inside Alex's own law firm were actively questioning financial transactions that would eventually expose years of theft. At the time, though, no one knew what the full scope of the theft. That same day, another emotional weight hung over the family. Alex's father, Randolph Murdaugh III, was near the end of his life. He had been battling cancer, and family members were coming and going. Medical care was ongoing. Their Murdaugh family, I don't know why I keep saying it like that. The Murdaugh family had been preparing for the reality that Randolph's death was approaching. Witnesses later testified that Alex appeared emotional about his father's condition. And rightfully so. That's your dad. You're going to be very upset. But whether that emotional strain affected anything that happened after later remains impossible to really measure. And it formed part of the backdrop, though, to an already overwhelming day. Meanwhile, Maggie was at the family's home in Edisto, I think it's Edisto, right? Island. Unlike Moselle, which served as a hunting property in Royal Retreat, the Edisto house sat near the coast. Friends later testified that Maggie wasn't necessarily planning to spend the evening at Moselle. According to testimony presented during the murder trial, Alex had asked her to come. The reason for that request became a point of discussion during the trial. Prosecutors suggested Alex wanted Maggie at Moselle that evening. The defense argued there was nothing unusual about a husband asking his wife to meet him at one of their family properties. But what we do know is that Maggie did eventually agree to go. She drove from Edisto toward Moselle, and before leaving, she exchanged text messages with friends. Some of those messages would later become part of the investigation because they provided insight to her plans and her state of mind. There was nothing in them suggesting she believed that she was in danger. Paul also made plans to come to Moselle, and he was living with the pending criminal charges stemming from the boat crash that killed Mallory Beach. And because that case, if you remember, was still unsolved, it was still ongoing. There was still civil litigation, which was continuing. Literally nothing was closed by that trial because of the fact that Paul was murdered. And friends later described Paul as carrying significant stress related to those legal proceedings. Even so, June 7th began like many others. He communicated with friends. He made ordinary plans. At one point, he mentioned checking on his friend's dog that was staying in one of the kennels at Moselle, and that seemingly routine decision would unexpectedly create one of the most important pieces of evidence in that entire case. As evening approached, the family gathered at Moselle. Alex, Maggie, and Paul. There has been extensive discussion over exactly what happened during dinner. Investigators recovered evidence suggesting the family ate together that evening. Cell phone records, text messages, and testimony helped establish portions of the timeline. What remains impossible to know is the nature of every conversation they had. Did they argue? Were they relaxed? Did anyone sense something was wrong? There's no definitive evidence answering those questions. That's probably one of the hardest parts of reconstructing real events, is that you don't know what people were thinking, what they were saying, what exactly was happening. You can only guess. And we see that in like reconstructions of like docuseries where they'll like act out, or films based on real events, because they don't truly know what was happening in those conversations. Even if somebody tells you, you still don't know the full scope of that conversation, or if what they're saying is even true. After dinner, though, the family separated briefly. At some point, Maggie and Paul headed toward the kennels. Moselle wasn't a typical suburban property. Like we had said, the kennels were located several hundred yards away from the main house, because again, this was a big estate. So again, basically picture like the royal estate of their hunting grounds, how the kennels are a bit farther away from the main house. So and people often were driving like golf carts and utility vehicles. So again, picturing the royal, that kind of helps a lot. Paul went to check on a dog named Cash, which belonged to his friend Rogan Gibson. And Cash had an issue with his tail, and Rogan had asked Paul to look at it. Again, in a very ordinary request, one friend asking the other to check on their dog, especially if they're boarding there.
Yeah.
Nobody could have imagined that the simple favor would preserve evidence, though investigators would later consider critical. Because while at the kennels, Paul began recording a video on his cell phone. His intention wasn't to document anything involving his family. He wanted to send Rogan a video of Cash's injured tail. And the clip only lasts seconds. But within those seconds, investigators later identified something kind of remarkable. There were 3 voices: Paul's, Maggie's, and someone the prosecution identified as Alex Murdaugh. Multiple witnesses familiar with Alex's voice, including close friends and family, testified that they recognized him speaking in the background. This mattered because Alex had repeatedly told investigators he had not gone to the kennels before discovering the bodies. If he was on the recording, that statement isn't true. And the video was time-stamped approximately at 8:44 p.m. Investigators would later describe it as one of the most significant moments in the case, and rightfully so. And it's not because it showed any violence, it's not because it captured an argument or even gunshots. It literally just placed Alex at the kennels minutes before prosecutors believed that Maggie and Paul were killed. And a lot of times, the most important evidence isn't always overly dramatic. It just is a few seconds of an ordinary conversation. After the kennel video, though, the timestamp becomes much quieter. Phones stopped moving, messages went unanswered, activity on Maggie and Paul's devices changed dramatically. Investigators later estimated the murders occurred sometime after the kennel video and before Alex left to visit his mother. The exact minute has never been established with certainty, and honestly, it really won't be. They can do, medical examiners can give you an approximate, but that's pretty much about it. Friends had tried to reach them with no reply. Calls and texts were not answered. And according to Alex, he had eventually left Moselle to visit his mother in Alameda. His mother suffered from Alzheimer's disease and required around-the-clock care. Alex later said that he had visited her that evening before returning to Moselle. The visit itself wasn't disputed. What investigators examined closely was the timing. Vehicle data from Alex's Chevy Suburban recorded speed, ignition cycles, and movement. Now, if you were somebody who watched that documentary, what is it called? We were just talking about it recently, with that
Crash.
girl. Yeah, Crash. Literally, I don't why.
Crash.
Yeah,
or whatever.
Crash.
Yeah.
If you are somebody who watched that, they literally talk about all of that stuff in Crash, because they used that in the trial.
Yeah.
So all of that combined with cell phone records, with those digital footprints, allowed investigators to estimate when Alex had left Moselle, how long he remained at his mother's house, and when he returned. Modern vehicles quietly record a lot of information. Most that we don't even think about, to be honest with you. Like, it records, like, your, they almost describe it in Crash as, like, a black box, basically. How, like, when something, like, when your car crashes, it'll basically record, like, a few seconds of, like, whether you were accelerating or braking during that time. And it can show that. It can show more than that, but, like, there's a lot of data now that comes in out of cars. And this data that was coming out of his car basically became a minute-by-minute reconstruction of his movements. And we're going to go through it a little bit further. At approximately 10:06 p.m., Alex had called 911. His voice sounded emotional. He told dispatchers he had returned home and found Maggie and Paul near the kennels. During the call, he repeatedly told the operator that they had been shot. He mentioned checking for signs of life. He described trying to turn Paul's body. He told dispatchers that Paul had been receiving threats related to the 2019 boat crash. This statement immediately became a part of the investigative picture. And if you think about it, it can honestly make some sense. His son was a part of a horrible crash that killed a young lady. And he definitely could have been receiving threats. Who knows? People blamed him. He was allegedly the one that was driving. We don't have any answer there for sure because the trial never happened, but we don't know. So somebody could have been angry, right? Deputies arrived within minutes. They encountered one of the most complex crime scenes in South Carolina history. Maggie had been shot multiple times, and Paul had suffered devastating shotgun wounds. 2 different firearms had appeared to have been used. The property covered more than 1,700 acres, and there were multiple buildings, numerous vehicles, several potential entry points, and no obvious suspect was waiting to be arrested, obviously. Initially, investigators treated Alex as they would any husband who had discovered his murdered family. He was interviewed, his clothing was documented, hands were examined, he provided an account of his evening. At that point, investigators had no kennel video. They didn't check, obviously they don't have his phone, they're right on the scene. Or they're not, like, checking the cell phone app data yet. They don't have the vehicle data, no digital timeline, which would all come later. What they had that night, though, was a grieving husband 2 homicide victims, and an enormous property filled with questions. Over the months, detectives would begin comparing Alex's statements against the digital evidence, minute by minute, text by text, step by step. Some details matched, and others didn't. One inconsistency, above all others, would become the centerpiece of the prosecution's case. Alex had repeatedly told investigators he wasn't at the kennels before discovering Maggie and Paul, and Paul's cell phone suggested otherwise, how we have already learned. And that discovery immediately solved the murders, basically. Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know why I said that. It wouldn't immediately solve the murders. It should have, but it didn't.
Should have. It really should have.
But it did change the investigation because it made detectives establish that Alex had lied about that part of the evening. And it started to make them question things. And that's the bigger question. What else wasn't he telling them? And as we've already talked about it in the last episode, and I think I do bring it up again, was the call where he was allegedly shot on the side of the road that he had actually set up. Don't worry, we'll come back to it.
We'll come back to that.
And if you've listened to enough true crime, you've probably heard detectives say something like, the victim's phone told us everything. And in reality, phones obviously don't solve crimes. People solve crimes. Phones, vehicles, surveillance cameras, GPS records even, text messages and call logs leave behind thousands of tiny pieces of information. And the challenge is figuring out what those pieces actually ever mean. But that's exactly what investigators faced on June 7th, 2021. There was no eyewitnesses who claimed to have seen Alex Murdaugh pull the trigger. There was no confession, no murder weapon, no DNA that conclusively identified the killer. I mean, of course, his DNA is going to be everywhere in there on them, especially if he's telling them that he was checking for signs of life, and, you know, makes sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
A grieving person, your first thought is not who's going to come across that. Your first thought is not going to always be to not touch them. You're going to be, you know what I mean? So, like, yeah, of course that makes sense. But that digital trail, that would be looked at over the course of the next several months, and it would become impossible to ignore. One of the first major challenges investigators faced was reconstructing that timeline that we just talked about. And every homicide investigation begins with the simple question of, when did the victims die? And that answer helps to determine a lot, basically. Who had the opportunity, who has an alibi, who can be eliminated. And the medical examiners estimated Paul and Maggie died sometime after 8:45 p.m. The exact minute couldn't be determined. Like I said, they're not able to do that, and outdoor crime scenes can notoriously be difficult to work with. Temperature, weather, insect activity, and countless environmental factors make pinpointing a precise time of death much harder than we would like there to be. Investigators therefore relied heavily on the digital evidence to help them. Paul's phone, though, became one of the most important pieces. His final video, the one recorded for his friend Rogan Gibson, captured more than a dog's injured tail. It was the voices. And at first, that might not sound remarkable, like we had said, but compared with Alex's interview, people confirming that it sounds like him made him sound very inaccurate. Sorry, hang on. The investigators had interviewed numerous witnesses who knew Alex well, so they were able to identify, like, his friends, family members, employees. Several independently identified that that voice was Alex, and eventually even members of the Murdaugh family acknowledged that it sounded like him. Years later, Alex himself admitted during his testimony that it was his voice. And that admission drastically changed one of the earlier parts of the investigation, because Alex had finally acknowledged that he had lied about being at the kennels. Who would have thought?
Who would have thought? He's not the most truthful man, okay?
Who would have thought the guy that had been stealing from his family's law firm for years could lie about where he was? His explanation was that his long-standing opioid addiction that had made him paranoid had been distrustful of law enforcement in the past, and he testified that he feared becoming an immediate suspect and therefore lied about where he had been. The prosecution argued something very different. They said innocent people don't need to invent timelines. They argued the lie mattered because Alex wasn't simply mistaken. He had repeatedly denied being there. And the jury would ultimately decide how much significance to place on that false statement. Phones, however, revealed much more than the single video. Investigators analyzed thousands of data points from Maggie's phone, Paul's, Alex's, and again, our phones record extraordinary amounts of information. Even when a phone is locked, it often continues quietly collecting information in the background. And we know this. This is like the whole like tinfoil hat, like your phones are listening to you, but it's not really tinfoil because they really are for the most part. Like this is true. Activity on Maggie and Paul's phone stopped suddenly after the kennel video. That abrupt silence became significant because there was no lengthy conversations, there was no social media activity, no meaningful communication after approximately the time prosecutors believe the shootings occurred. Maggie's phone was later found along the side of a road not far from Moselle, and that discovery raised immediate questions. Had the killer discarded it while leaving the property? Was it thrown intentionally? Could it reveal movements after the murders? And digital forensic experts examined everything that they could recover. While the phone helped investigators narrow portions of the timeline, it never produced a dramatic smoking gun. Instead, it just became another piece fitting into that much larger puzzle that they were working on. And Alex's Chevy Suburban told its own story. Like I'd said, many newer vehicles automatically record operational data. So like speed, gear changes, ignition cycles, door openings, acceleration, braking. Now let's combine that with the cell phone records, and investigators reconstructed Alex's movements with a surprising precision. One section of vehicle data received considerable attention during the trial. According to investigators, shortly before leaving Moselle, Alex's vehicle recorded unusual rapid movement. The prosecution argued that this activity suggested urgency, and the defense countered that that interpreting movement inside or around a vehicle requires caution because ordinary actions can generate similar data. And this became a recurring theme throughout the case. The prosecution viewed the evidence collectively, and the defense encouraged jurors to examine every individual piece separately. Then came the shell casings. Crime scene investigators recovered cartridge cases from both the area where Paul was killed and the location where Maggie was found. Firearm experts compared those shell casings with others recovered from the Moselle property. According to testimony, certain shell casings found near Maggie were consistent with markings produced by a .300 blackout rifle that had previously been used around Moselle. That point often gets... Is it 300 or 30? That's going to bother me because I don't know why there's two zeros. Let me make sure I'm right. Yeah, it's a 30. Yeah, 300. It's a 30 caliber projectiles. Yeah. Okay, so I'm right. And that point often gets misunderstood. Investigators didn't recover the murder weapons. No firearm was conclusively identified as the weapon that was used in the killing. Instead, experts testified that the shell casings recovered from earlier shooting activities on the property appeared to have been cycled through the same firearm that later fired cartridge cases found near Maggie's body. So the prosecution argued this suggested a family-owned weapon had likely been used, because it was basically what they would use on the property, like to go hunting.
Yeah.
So
that makes sense.
Without recovery of the rifle itself, though, they argued investigators could not prove exactly which firearm fired the fatal shots because the defense emphasized that the distinction was that there was no recovery of that actual rifle, of like the exact one that they believe fired. That debate became one of the most technical portions of the trial. Investigators also examined Alex's clothing. One of the earliest questions involved whether blood splatter. Oh, wow, this is one of those things that like trips me up a lot. Blood spatter. Listen, we're just gonna go with it. That whatever you got is what you're gonna get. Would be expected on the shooter's clothing. Initial public reporting suggested investigators believed Alex's shirt contained blood splatter.
Splatter?
I forgot an L in there. I think that's what's happening. Splatter. It should be splatter.
Yeah, it should be splatter, not spatter.
Girl, whatever you got is what you're gonna get.
You know
okay,
what?
We're gonna keep going.
It's you. It's you. It's your world, girl. I'm just living in it.
As the case progressed, that theory changed significantly. During trial, prosecutors did not rely on microscopic blood splatter testimony as a central pillar of their case. Instead, they focused on broader forensic and digital evidence. There was also testimony involving a blue rain jacket, or coat, whatever you want to call it, found at Alex's mother's home. Investigators argued that gunshot residue and other evidence connected the garment to the case, and the defense challenged both the testing methods and the interpretation of the results. So they basically were like, yeah, they basically said that like it could have just been a regular hunting jacket.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. I have feelings
like
about
so much else in this. I know. Yeah. There's, like so much else in this investigation, the raincoat became another contested piece rather than a definitive proof. Throughout the investigation, detectives repeatedly interviewed Alex. Each interview gave investigators another opportunity to compare his statements against the growing body of digital evidence. And some portions did remain consistent, and others changed or evolved. His explanation of where he had been changed once the kennel video emerged. His timeline became more detailed. His recollections of events shifted. And defense attorneys argued that memory after trauma is imperfect. Prosecutors argued that changing stories reflected consciousness of guilt. And again, the evidence itself did not tell jurors what conclusion to reach. It simply gave them information to evaluate. Then there was motive. One of the first questions people ask in any murder case is always, why? What happened? Why did this happen? The prosecution's answer centered on financial pressure, like we have been talking about. By June 2021, Alex faced mounting scrutiny from the Beach lawsuit. His law firm had begun asking questions about the missing fees. Years of theft were becoming increasingly difficult to hide. Prosecutors described these overlapping pressures as a perfect storm. They argued Alex believed the murders would create sympathy, delay financial scrutiny, and buy him time. And the defense strongly rejected that theory. And I mean, it is fucking outlandish. Like, it's pretty crazy. The fact that, like, somebody would kill their family just to buy them time to figure out how to lie further about the money they've been stealing.
Like, that's insane.
Yeah, like, that's fucking crazy. That's something that you would see on, like, a crazy, like, telenovela or TV. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you would see, like, in some kind of crazy drama. Yeah. Like, you would see that in something, like, crazy, not, like, real life. But,
hey.
Or imitates life most of the time, right? Isn't that what they say?
Yeah.
Oh, no, I lost my spot. The defense strongly rejected that theory. They pointed out that killing Maggie and Paul did not eliminate the Beach lawsuit, which of course it didn't, because it wasn't Paul that was being sued in that. It was Alex, because it was his boat. Even though Paul was on trial for her murder, It didn't erase bank account records, it didn't remove stolen settlement documents, and if anything, they argue the murders brought even greater attention to Alex's life. And that's true, it did. I mean, it definitely did. Jurors would ultimately have to decide whether the prosecution's motive made sense. And really, again, like, you think about it, like, it's fucking crazy. But people
like,
do crazy
you have
shit.
all of these legal troubles, and then, okay, you're like, these are going to go away, and I'm going to kill my family. That's not realistic.
It's like, let's add murder to it.
Yeah.
And all of us will just go away.
Right. Because he was only going to serve, like, how many years for all of these things? Probably, like, 20?
Yeah, it
maybe?
wasn't. Yeah. And would he have served all of that
would
time?
He have?
Because, again, consider that this is a white-collar crime.
Yeah.
We do see white-collar criminals tend to not do full-time for things like that. Who knows? Especially with how prominent his family was in that area. You know what I mean? Like, who knows how much time he really would have been given. Importantly, motive is not an element prosecutors are legally required to prove, and defendant can be convicted of murder without a proven motive, which is true. We don't need to know what their motive is to convict somebody. We just need to know whether the evidence that's being presented to us is enough to convict the person that we think did it, or that is being put on trial for it. By the time investigators presented the case to a grand jury in July of 2022, they believed they had assembled enough evidence to charge Alex Murdaugh with the murders of Maggie and Paul. Their case relied heavily on circumstantial evidence. Circumstantial evidence is sometimes hard and misunderstood. People often think that it means weak. And it doesn't, but it can, right? It can, but it doesn't always. Circumstantial just simply means that it simply requires an inference. For example, if you walk outside and the ground is wet, you might reasonably conclude it rained, right? Like, you'd say, sure, it seems like it may have rained. You didn't see it. You didn't even know if it happened overnight. But the surrounding evidence supports that it did. Many criminal convictions, including homicide convictions, are based largely on circumstantial evidence. The question isn't whether evidence is circumstantial, it's whether it should be taken together and if it convinces a jury beyond reasonable doubt. That would become the central issue of Alex Murdaugh's murder trial. The prosecution believed the pieces fit together into one unmistakable picture, and the defense argued investigators had assembled a collection of suspicious circumstances without proving who actually fired the weapons. Both sides would soon have the opportunity to present their case, and after months of investigation, thousands of pages of reports, countless interviews, and an avalanche of digital evidence, the case finally entered the courtroom, where every piece of evidence would be challenged, every witness cross-examined, and every minute of June 7th would be replayed in extraordinary detail before 12 jurors tasked with answering one question. Did the evidence prove, beyond a reasonable doubt, that Alex Murdaugh murdered his wife and son? On January 23rd, 2023, nearly 19 months after Maggie and Paul Murdaugh were killed at Moselle, the trial the entire county had been waiting for finally began. So this is now just under 2 years, so roughly a year and a half or 19 months after they were killed, is when the trial finally took place. The courtroom was in Waterboro, South Carolina. Judge Clifton Newman presided over the proceedings. Presided over the proceedings. By this point, Alex Murdaugh wasn't just facing murder charges. The public already knew about the financial crimes, the roadside shooting, like I had mentioned, which is still crazy, the theft from clients, the Gloria Satterfield settlement, the beach boat crash. The Murdaugh name had gone from representing power in South Carolina to becoming the center of one of the most complicated criminal cases in recent memory. Reporters from around the country packed the courtroom. Television cameras carried the proceedings live every day, and legal analysts dissected every witness. Social media debated every piece of testimony almost in real time. This wasn't simply another murder trial. It had become a national event. One of the first things the jury had to understand was exactly what kind of case they were hearing. This was not a DNA case. It was not a fingerprint case. There was no eyewitness who claimed they saw Alex pull the trigger. No murder weapon had even been recovered. Instead, prosecutors told jurors something very simple. This case would be built on circumstances. One fact by itself might not seem overwhelming, but taken together, they argued the evidence pointed in only one direction. The defense had a very different message. Lead attorney Jim Griffin told jurors that suspicion is not proof. He argued investigators had focused on Alex too quickly and ignored other possible suspects. He reminded the jury that every criminal defendant enters the courtroom presumed innocent. The burden was entirely on the state of South Carolina. And it was like California.
So close, but not at all.
I know. Alex did not have to prove who committed the murders. The state had to prove that he did, and they had to do it beyond a reasonable doubt. And that standard would become the heartbeat of the entire trial. The prosecution began laying the foundation for the case. Rather than immediately calling investigators or forensic experts, they first introduced witnesses who would explain the Murdaugh family itself. Friends, relatives, people who knew the routines at Moselle, people who would describe the relationships between Alex, Maggie, and Paul. And this mattered because the defense repeatedly emphasized one point basically throughout the entire trial, was that there was no evidence that Alex hated his wife. There was no evidence he wanted a divorce, no evidence of ongoing domestic violence, no history suggesting he wanted to harm his sons. In fact, many witnesses described Alex as an involved father. He attended sporting events, spent time hunting and fishing with Paul. He appeared as somebody who was just close with his family. And that testimony may seem surprising in a murder trial, but it also was very important. And I honestly don't think it's that surprising. The prosecution wasn't trying to prove Alex had spent years planning to kill his family. They were just arguing that overwhelming financial pressure had reached a breaking point. And as investigators took the stand, jurors were introduced to Moselle itself. Photographs of the property filled courtroom screens. Maps showed the distance between the main residence and the dog kennels. Crime scene photographs documented where Maggie and Paul were found. Paul's body was near the feed room, and Maggie was discovered farther away. She was near the edge of the kennels. Jurors learned that she also, can we just talk about the fact that this kind of happened in front of dogs? We have not discussed that literally at all.
Yeah.
What the fuck?
Insane, right?
What the fuck? I don't know why that's just something that just registered for a second. I think I'm just sitting there thinking oh, the dogs aren't here. They're no. Just, it's empty kennels. They were just happened to be down there cleaning or doing
dozens
something.
Of dogs. Dozens of dogs.
Yeah, I'm literally not thinking about the fact that there was actual dogs. There was that I don't know why. I guess finally rereading through the part about Paul's friend's dog being there.
Yeah.
Finally just made it click for me. I don't know why. I literally, as I'm going through this case, I didn't even think about that. I don't know. It just fully clicked for me that's so horrible. Anyway, I'm sorry. That was important. Jurors learned that 2 different firearms appeared to have been used. Paul had been killed with a shotgun, and Maggie had been shot with a .300 blackout-style rifle. Which is fucking weird. And it makes it suggest that there were 2 different killers, but or 2 different shooters.
Does it though? Or did she run, and that's why he had to... someone had to use a different gun.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
that's what I think about. Did she run, and that's why they went for the long range?
Because it makes you feel okay, he did Paul first. Whoever did Paul first, and then she ran, and he...
Because she was found not in the kennel Paul was.
Yeah.
Makes you think. That's all.
Or was it 2? You know, you don't know.
You don't know.
Well, we do.
We do know, but
we'll get there. The defense emphasized that investigators never recovered either murder weapon. Without the guns, they argued prosecutors were just asking jurors to fill in important gaps themselves. And again, they're not necessarily wrong. They're not necessarily wrong to play devil's advocate.
Yeah.
And next came the digital evidence. One witness after another explained how phones silently record information throughout the day. Cell phone experts walked jurors through call logs. Cell phone experts walked jurors through call logs, text messages, screen activity, step counts, orientation changes. Oh yeah, because like remember, your phones, if you use your phone and your Apple Watch, as we're actually, this is really interesting timeline or timing that we're doing this at the same time that, again, the Lindsay Clancy trial is happening, because they literally were just talking about that, about her phone Apple Watch tracking her movement and through the house. Yeah, because if your phone is connected to a smartwatch, and you use your smartwatch, or even an Oura Ring, because Oura Rings also track your steps and movements and things like that, or a smart ring in general, because there are other ones out there, it's going to report it back to your phone. So even if that device is missing, that's still going to be reported somewhere on your phone. Vehicle movement was also being looked at. And if you've never watched a criminal trial involving digital forensics, it can seem surprisingly technical, but honestly, in this day and age, it's really not that much anymore. The prosecution just understood that rather than overwhelming the jury with data all at once, they tried to slowly build the timeline so that they weren't just giving them all of that technical information at once. They tried to move through it minute by minute, and each witness added another layer to that, another timestamp, another movement, and another inconsistency. And gradually, June 7th became less like a memory and more like a reconstructed timeline. And then came the video, the kennel video. At first glance, it's almost disappointingly ordinary. Paul wasn't documenting a crime. He wasn't filming his family. Like we said, he was just recording his friend's dog, Cash, which is like a cool name, by the way, because of an injury to the dog's tail. And the recording will only last a couple of seconds. There's no gunshots, no argument, no confession, literally nothing in it. You just hear voices in the background. You hear Paul, and you hear Maggie, and you hear what appears to be Alex. And by itself, the recording didn't prove murder, obviously. What it did prove was something so much simpler, and it was that Alex had been at the kennels. And that mattered because he had repeatedly told investigators, like we said, that he wasn't there. During opening statements, the defense had already acknowledged that Alex had lied about going to the kennels. They argued he lied because he was paranoid, addicted to opiates, and afraid investigators would immediately suspect him. And the prosecution offered a different interpretation. They argued the lie wasn't born from fear. It was born from guilt. Jurors would eventually have to decide which explanation they believed. As the trial continued, prosecutors turned toward motive. Ordinarily, evidence of unrelated financial crimes might never be heard by a murder jury, but defense attorneys fought hard to keep that evidence out. They argued it would unfairly prejudice the jury. Judge Newman allowed much of the financial evidence to be introduced, and his reasoning was that the prosecutors weren't presenting the thefts simply to show that Alex had bad character. They were presenting them to explain why they believed the murders occurred when they did. Which is true, because that is basically their whole point. Their whole point of saying as to why he murdered their family wasn't, again, because there's no proof that he hated his family and didn't want to be with them. It was just that he had done it because of the pressure of his thefts coming out to kind of take away from it. Which, again, is fucking crazy.
It's insane.
The prosecution then spent days walking jurors through Alex's financial life. Missing settlements, fake forge accounts, loans, misappropriated client money, stolen legal fees. For some jurors, this testimony was probably very exhausting, to be quite honest with you. Names, bank records, checks, wire transfers, thousands upon thousands of financial documents. But prosecutors weren't trying to prove each financial crime all over again. They were establishing pressure that they argued was reaching a breaking point by June of 2021. Defense attorneys objected repeatedly, obviously. They argued the state was trying Alex for theft instead of murder. And the judge overruled many of these objections. The financial testimony was able to continue. And again, it was because they weren't trying to talk, that was its own thing that was happening, right? They were just trying to say that this is what caused this. They were trying to lead up. And perhaps the most emotional testimony came from people who had trusted Alex completely. Former clients, friends, law partners, employees. Many described realizing often years later that the settlement money they believed had been safely handled was now gone. Some spoke about losing not just money, but trust. The prosecution wasn't suggesting those financial victims proved Alex committed murder. Instead, they argued the fraud showed a man willing to repeatedly lie to protect himself, and basically only himself. Because he didn't care about his family name. He didn't care about his family. If he had cared about those things, he wouldn't have been doing them to begin with. And again, the defense urged jurors not to confuse financial dishonesty with murder. And again, they're not necessarily wrong.
Yeah, no, they're not wrong, but like that's not the point that the prosecution is proving.
They acknowledged Alex had stolen from clients. They argued that stealing money and killing your family were fundamentally different things. And again, you're not wrong. It was very far-fetched, but it was one of the central philosophical questions of the trial. How much weight should jurors give to lies told in one part of a person's life when deciding whether they committed an entirely different crime? And we see this all the time, though. We see money and fraud be involved with crime. So it's not entirely amiss to think that they would be connected. By the end of the prosecution's case, the jury had heard weeks of testimony. Investigators, crime scene analysts, financial experts, friends, law partners. They had gotten cell phone data, digital forensic specialists, medical professionals, and each witness contributed another piece. No single witness claimed to have solved the case. No single exhibit answered every question. Instead, prosecutors asked the jury to step back and look at the picture as a whole. The kennel video, the timeline, the lies, the financial pressure, the changing statements and digital evidence, the absence of any credible alternative suspect. Taken together, they argued, the evidence pointed to only one person, Alex Murdaugh. The defense disagreed completely. They maintained investigators developed tunnel vision almost immediately. And once Alex became the focus, they argued every piece of evidence was interpreted through that assumption. Alternative possibilities were never fully explored. Evidence that might have pointed elsewhere wasn't given the same attention. The state's timeline, they argued, depended too heavily on inference. The defense believed those inferences. I don't know why am I having so much trouble? We're just going to move on. We're not enough to remove reasonable doubt. At this point in the trial, however, the biggest moment had not yet happened. For weeks, jurors had watched prosecutors present witness after witness. Then, in a move many legal experts believed carried enormous risk, Alex Murdaugh made a decision that would define the rest of the trial. Against the advice many defense attorneys would say they'd give, he chose to testify. And for nearly 2 full days, the man at the center of one of America's most watched murder trials finally answered questions under oath. For the first time, the jury would hear directly from Alex himself. There's an old saying among criminal defense attorneys: you should never ask your client to do the prosecution's job for them. In most murder trials, defendants never testify, and there's good reason for that. The Constitution gives every criminal defendant the right to remain silent. A jury cannot legally hold that silence against them. If a defendant doesn't testify, prosecutors can't cross-examine them. They can't challenge every inconsistency. They can't force them to explain years of questionable decisions in front of 12 jurors. For that reason alone, many defense attorneys consider putting a client on the witness stand to be one of the riskiest decisions they can ever make. But every case is different, and by the third week of Alex's murder trial, his attorneys faced a difficult reality. The jury had spent weeks hearing about stolen money, fake accounts, lies, financial fraud, the cattle video, and perhaps most importantly, the prosecution had established that Alex lied to investigators about one of the most important moments of the night Maggie and Paul had died. The defense knew jurors had questions. If Alex never addressed those questions himself, the jury might conclude there were no good answers. So the defense made a decision. Alex would testify. It was a moment that surprised many legal analysts, not because defendants never do, but because Alex's credibility had already been severely damaged. So every answer he gave would be measured against years of documented deception. On February 23rd, 2020, Alex walked to the witness stand. He took the oath, and for the first time since the murderers answered questions in open court under penalty of perjury. Defense attorney Jim Griffin began gently, and the goal wasn't to challenge Alex. It was to let the jury see him as a husband, a father, a son, a human being. And Alex spoke emotionally about Maggie and about Paul and about family life, and he became visibly upset at several points while describing finding their bodies. Supporters of Alex later argued these moments demonstrated genuine grief. Critics believe the emotion appeared selective. One thing is important to remember here: there's no universally correct way for someone to grieve. People cry or they don't, and people become emotional or strangely calm, and jurors are entitled to observe Alex's demeanor, of course, but demeanor alone can't establish guilt or innocence. Then came the admissions. Alex acknowledged something the jury already knew: that he had lied repeatedly. He admitted lying to investigators about going to the kennels, stealing from clients, creating financial deception, and taking the money that wasn't his. Those admissions were extraordinary, I guess. Very few defendants voluntarily acknowledge years of criminal behavior while denying murder, and Alex's explanation centered on one theme: his opioid addiction. He testified that he had become addicted to pain medication years earlier. According to Alex, he was taking dozens of pills every day. He described feeling paranoid, suspicious, unable to think clearly. He said those feelings affected his judgment after Maggie and Paul's deaths. When investigators first interviewed him, he claimed he wasn't thinking rationally. He said his addiction caused him to lie about visiting the kennels because he believed the law enforcement would immediately suspect him. I think they're going to immediately suspect you anyway because the husband, whatever.
Yeah.
But notice what he wasn't saying. He wasn't claiming he accidentally lied. He wasn't saying he forgot. He admitted that the statement was false. His argument was that the lie had an innocent explanation. The prosecution, though, argued something entirely different. When prosecutor Creighton, oh God, is it
Creighton?
Okay. Waters, we're going to call him Waters, stood to begin cross-examination. The atmosphere inside the courtroom noticeably changed. Waters had spent months investigating Alex's financial situation. He knew the documents, bank records, he knew the timelines, and now he had the opportunity to question Alex directly. One of the first things Waters established was simple: Alex lied repeatedly. And Waters walked the jury through years of the theft, client by client, settlement by settlement. Each time Alex admitted taking money. Each time another lie became impossible to deny. And the cross-examination wasn't simply proving financial records. It was that he wanted them to ask a broader question. If Alex lied so easily to clients, to judges, to friends, law partners, family members, to investigators, well, why should they believe him now? It was a devastatingly simple strategy. Not because it proved anything, not because it proved that he murdered. If anything, it just really proved that he was really good at lying, and that his credibility had become one of the central issues of the entire trial. And then they returned to June 7th. Waters carefully reconstructed the evening. He walked Alex through dinner, the golf cart, kennel, the video, his visit to his mom, the 911 call. And again, he asked Alex to explain why his story had changed. Alex continued insisting that he never harmed Maggie or Paul. He acknowledged being there. He acknowledged lying about it. He denied ever pulling the trigger. And throughout cross-examination, Waters repeatedly pressed him on timing, on movements, statements, on the sequence of events. And sometimes Alex answered directly. Other times he gave longer explanations. And jurors watched every exchange, not just the words, the pauses, the expressions, the confidence or lack of it. And these are the moments no transcript can ever fully capture. Another topic dominated the testimony, though. Money. Waters spent hours reviewing those financial crimes, and some observers questioned why so much time was devoted to theft instead of murder. And I get it. Because, like, really, why are we focusing so much on it? Like, we are on a murder trial. We are not on a financial crime. But the finances explained the motive. Every stolen settlement, every fake forged check, not forged, remember Forge, the company, every missing fee, every unpaid debt, according to the prosecution, all of it just created pressure. Sorry.
You're good.
Pressure that reached its breaking point on June 7th. The defense pushed back. They reminded jurors that financial desperation doesn't automatically make someone a murderer. And no, of course it doesn't. But like we said, money has a way of making people do crazy, crazy things. And the prosecution agreed, though, that millions of people experience financial stress. Very, very few people kill their families over it. They weren't arguing, though, that financial pressure alone proved murder. They argued it just explained why Alex, specifically, might have believed he needed a dramatic distraction. And jurors had to decide if that theory made any sense. And it really fucking doesn't to me. We know what happened, and it still doesn't fucking make sense.
Yeah.
After weeks of testimony, both sides delivered closing arguments. Waters stood before the jury and argued that no single piece of evidence solved the case. It was a combination of everything. And taken together, Waters argued they formed one consistent picture. The defense responded that prosecutors had built a case on assumptions. They urged jurors to remember that suspicion, even strong suspicion, is not enough. The law requires proof beyond a reasonable doubt, and nothing less. The case went to the jury on March 2nd, 2023. Many observers expected lengthy deliberations. After all, this had been a 6-week trial involving hundreds of exhibits and dozens of witnesses, and instead, the jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. 3 hours is what it took them.
That's insane. With all of the evidence that they had to, like, go through to come up with a decision. Oh my God.
They returned guilty verdicts on both murder charges. And Alex showed little visible reaction as the verdicts were read. Some members of Maggie's family cried, others sat silently. And here's the thing. I can't say that his lack of reaction means something, because, like, obviously, like, it's always freaky when we see somebody that's, like, being, like, deemed guilty, like, read a guilty verdict for murder, and they don't have a reaction is always, like, creepy and scary. But, like, I don't know. I feel like it doesn't always mean something. You know what I mean? For the most part, it does. But
for the most part, yeah. I don't know. I think it's just kind of strange to have zero reaction. I mean, definitely like, is. Yeah, you can be in, like, disbelief, sure, but to, like, have nothing else come up, yeah, is a little suspect.
I think for, like, devil's advocate, like, holding it together maybe in front of people, and, like, the shock of it could, like, stop people from having a visible reaction. I think what's really telling for me is what do their eyes look like? Yeah. And what is, like, the micro, like,
yeah, like their body language
on their face. Yeah, like stuff. What is that micro reaction of their body, of their face? Because, like, your face is gonna have a micro reaction, right?
Right.
I think that's what I look at more so than anything else. For many people in Hampton County, it marked the end of one chapter in a story that had dominated the community for years. The following day, Judge Clifton Newman sentenced Alex to 2 consecutive life sentences. Before imposing sentence, Newman reflected on the remarkable downfall of the Murdaugh family. He also spoke directly to Alex, acknowledging the tragedy of seeing someone from such a prominent legal family standing before the court as a convicted murderer. Alex maintained his innocence. Even after sentencing, he insisted he never killed Maggie or Paul. And for a time, many people believed the story was over, that Alex had been convicted. He also pled guilty to dozens of financial crimes, and the Murdaugh dynasty appeared finished. But criminal cases don't always end with a verdict. The legal system includes another layer: appeals. And in this case, the appeal would eventually raise questions that had nothing to do with DNA, nothing to do with ballistics, and nothing to even do with the kennel video. Instead, it's centered on the conduct of the very people responsible for ensuring Alex received a fair trial. Former Colton County Clerk of Court Becky Hill became the focus of allegations that she had improper communications with jurors during the trial. Defense attorneys argued those interactions may have influenced deliberations. Initially, hang on 1 second, I'm sorry. He took her outside to play with her bubbles. Initially, a trial judge rejected Alex's request for a new trial, but the issue didn't end there. In May 2026, the South Carolina Supreme Court issued a decision that stunned many observers. The court overturned Alex Murdaugh's murder convictions and ordered a new trial. Not because the justices concluded he was innocent, not because they rejected the evidence, but because they determined that improper conduct by the clerk of court undermined confidence and the fairness of the jury process. The court emphasized something fundamental about the American legal system: a fair trial is not optional. Even defendants accused of the most serious crimes are entitled to one. As of today, Alex Murdaugh remains in prison, not because of the murder convictions, those were vacated. He remains incarcerated because of the lengthy state and federal sentences imposed for his financial crimes. Prosecutors have announced that they intend to try the murder case again. So, more than 5 years after Maggie and Paul were killed, the central question remains legally unresolved. Did Alex Murdaugh murder his wife and son? A jury once answered yes, and that verdict no longer stands. Another jury will eventually be asked the same question, and once again, it will weigh the evidence. The same timeline, the same kennel video, the same lies, the same digital breadcrumbs, and decide whether the state has proven its case beyond a reasonable doubt. That is where the story stands today. Not with certainty, not with another chapter still waiting to be, but with another chapter still waiting to be written. Because unlike so many true crime stories, the Murdaugh case isn't history yet. It's still unfolding. The Alex Murdaugh case has been called a murder mystery, a financial crime, a family tragedy, a story about power, a story about corruption. The truth is, it's all of those things. You could.
The guy's just rubbing his truck in my parking lot. I have no idea why.
Love that. What makes this case so difficult isn't just the evidence. It's that almost every answer seems to create another question. If Alex Murdaugh is ultimately convicted again at a retrial, people will continue asking how someone with every opportunity in life could end up here. If he's acquitted, people will spend years debating whether investigators reached the wrong conclusion or whether reasonable doubt was always present. Either way, there are questions that may never be answered. We'll probably never know exactly what was said over the dinner on June 7th, 2021. We'll never know what Maggie and Paul were thinking as they walked towards the kennels that evening. We'll never know if there was a single moment where everything changed or if the collapse had been building for years before anyone could see it. But there are some things we do know. We know that Maggie and Paul lost their lives. We know that Mallory Beach never made it home after a night out with friends. We know that Gloria Satterfield's family was deprived of the settlement meant to help them after losing their mother. We know that dozens of clients trusted their attorney with some of the most difficult moments of their lives and were instead betrayed. Those facts don't change regardless of what happens in a future murder trial. They're part of that story forever. And this case also reminds us how complicated justice can be. A guilty verdict doesn't always end a case. An appeal doesn't automatically erase the evidence. And a new trial doesn't tell us what the final outcome will be. It simply means the legal system has decided that one of its most important promises, a fair trial, must be protected, even in a case as high profile as this one. And that principle can be frustrating, it can be difficult, but it's also one of the foundations that we have to rely on. The same rights that protect someone accused in a case as infamous as this protect every person who's entered a courtroom. And maybe that's one reason the Murdaugh case has stayed with so many people. It isn't just a story about one family. It's a story about trust and influence, about what happens when reputation goes unquestioned for too long, about how financial crimes that seemed invisible for years eventually came to light, and about a murder case that, despite years of investigation, documentaries, books, podcasts, and thousands of pages of testimony, still leave room for debate. Whether another jury ultimately reaches the same conclusion or a different one, the impact of this case has already been felt far beyond a courtroom in South Carolina. It reshaped a community, it exposed failures within trusted institutions, it changed the lives of countless families, and it serves as a reminder that behind every headline, every court filing, and every and every viral documentary are real people whose lives were permanently altered. And that is where we are at with this case.
It's so devastating that the court clerk decided to talk to the jury. And she was interviewed during the documentary that was out on HBO Max, and she was like, yeah, I told them to think about all the evidence. And I'm like, girl, you're a court clerk. You could not talk to the jury. You should know that.
Yeah, and not for nothing, but that's literally what they're going to do.
Literally.
That's literally their job, is to now go and deliberate and to think about all of the evidence. Like, can we be so for real right now?
Like, you did not have to tell them that, and you just set yourself up for the case to be retried again. Like, it's so crazy. I don't know. This case is crazy. It's been like one of my hyper fixations for a while. Yeah. When all of those documentaries came out, like in 23 or 24.
You know what's crazy is I never watched any of them. I do remember it, but I just didn't watch it.
It's crazy. So when is the new trial? Do they have a date for the new trial?
You know what? I can't remember because I didn't put it in here. Let me see. Let's see. Is there? Oh, there's a ruling from 3 days ago. So they appeared in the courtroom last Friday. So it's set for April of 2027 is the retrial.
Wow.
But they did move where it would be because they said that it'll be an unfair retrial in Colton County.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But she hasn't decided where it's going to be yet. Okay. But it is set for April 5th of 2027.
Dang.
Yeah, so they just don't know where yet.
It's just so sad because at the heart of this story, a family is destroyed. Yeah. 2 families are destroyed.
Yeah.
A teenager never got to go to college, never graduated, never got to become a mom or a wife. Like, that's so devastating. Yep. And then a wife and a child are killed as well. Mm-hmm. It's just an awful case.
Yeah, there's 2 families that don't get answers on all of this, and it's just horrible.
It is. It's terrible. Great job, Nicole.
Yeah.
Thank you for doing this one.
Yeah.
It was a doozy.
Well, yeah, it really was. It's a lot. So we will definitely come back to it though when the retrial happens. So don't worry. We'll take a look at it. We'll watch the retrial. We'll see what happens, and once that retrial finishes taking place, we'll come back to it.
Definitely.
So we'll see. Maybe we'll do some live updates during the trial too. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens in the spring.
Yeah, it's a little bit of ways away, so we'll see where we're at. But whether it's crime, conspiracy, or straight up spooky, we're going to keep talking about it. Like, follow, comment, and stay tuned for new episodes each week because it'll just keep getting darker and spookier from here. And if you have stories you want us to tell, please send them in because we want to tell them. Send them to goreandgossippod@gmail.com. So stay nosy and stay spooky, and we'll see you guys next time.
Bye,
guys. Thank you.